Hi guys, it's Miss Weems. Miss you. Still do. I know, I'm pathetic. I said it yesterday. So, today we're going to talk about anxiety disorders, okay? Okay. So, an anxiety disorder is characterized by a distressing and persistent anxiety or maladaptive behavior that are used to reduce anxiety, okay? So, there are four types of anxiety disorders: generalized anxiety disorders, panic disorders, phobias, and OCD. And we're going to talk about each one of those. Okay, so a generalized anxiety disorder is a person is continually tense, nervous, or apprehensive, and in a state of autonomic nervous system arousal. Now remember, autonomic nervous system is your fight or flight. So the fight or flight instinct, that sense of adrenaline coursing through, is very easily triggered and is almost constantly ready to go. Okay? So people who have this have difficulty focusing because their mind's just running to everything they're concerned about. They have issues with sleeping, and they're easily agitated. Anxiety can lead to other health issues like ulcers, which is where there is a hole in your stomach, in the lining of your stomach, and your stomach acid goes up against it, and it's very painful, and it takes a very long time to heal. And they can have very high blood pressure. Often they can't even identify the exact cause of what's giving them anxiety, and sometimes it pairs up with depression very easily. Okay? Okay. So, um, okay. 2/3 of the people with generalized anxiety disorders are women. Okay. Now let's talk about panic attacks. Panic disorders are unpredictable, minute-long episodes of severe dread and terror. They're usually accompanied by chest pain and choking. A lot of people say they feel like a heart attack, and it comes on very, very suddenly. It causes people to avoid situations that may spark it. So again, we talked about the three things that lead to a behavior being called a disorder. The second you have to start changing your life in order to avoid a panic attack occurring, that's becoming it's impacting your quality of life. So agoraphobia is actually a phobia. It's a fear of situations where escape or help could be unavailable if someone had a panic attack. So they avoid situations not only that trigger it, but situations where if they had one, they'd have a really hard time getting help. Okay, panic disorders impact 1 in 75 people, and smokers are at a much higher risk of having panic attacks because of their artery issues. Okay. So there's all of your symptoms of a panic attack. All right, let's talk about phobias. So, a phobia is an intense, irrational fear and an avoidance of the subject or object. So, I'm not talking about like people who have a fear of, like, they don't like heights and therefore they won't look over railings, they won't fly, they have to be medicated to get onto an airplane. They have like these overwhelming fears to the point where it's impacting their ability to live. Not liking something, having a fear of something is not a phobia. To have a phobia, it has to impact your ability to live your life. Okay? But many people live and deal with phobias. They are a little bit more common. But some have to go to extreme efforts to avoid the situation. So the nation's top 10 most common phobias, you get arachnophobia, fear of spiders. Now look, I don't like spiders, but I don't not go outside for fear that there might be a spider. Like, this is the level of phobia. Social phobia is a fear of social public situations. Aerophobia is a fear of flying. My cousin has that. She has to be medicated to get onto an airplane. Agoraphobia is a fear of open or public spaces. Claustrophobia is fear of enclosed spaces. My mother has that. Has little panic attacks if she's in a place where she doesn't feel like she can escape. Emetophobia is a fear of vomiting. Acrophobia is a fear of heights. Cancerphobia is a fear of developing cancer. Brontophobia is a fear of thunderstorms, and necrophobia is a fear of death, yours or even other people's. And again, a fear of it versus a phobia. Phobia has to have distressing avoidance behavior issues that impact your ability to live your life. Okay. All right, OCD. So, obsessive compulsive disorder is often termed wrong in pop culture. So, OCD is when compulsive thoughts or actions interfere with your living and causing personal distress. If you like your house organized, that's not OCD. Having to have 2 different refrigerators with 3 of each item in them in order to function, that's OCD. And that's actually not something I made up. David Beckham, famous soccer player, he has OCD, and that's what he has to have in his kitchen in order to function. Certain things have to be separated, and there have to be in 3s because he can't handle less than 3 of those items in the refrigerator. Okay. Having to flip the light switch off 5 times in order to go into a room is OCD. So usually develops in late teens and early 20s. In about 2 to 3% of people, OCD is somewhat rare. Okay. Without treatment, people can become really obsessed with the ritual and have a really, like, almost an emotional breakdown if they can't follow their steps. Usually, OCD gets better with age, and we have seen a genetic, or I should say a hereditary element, okay? All right. All right, PTSD. Okay, so PTSD is characterized by haunting memories, severe nightmares, social withdrawal, anxiety, insomnia, and it has to be around 4 weeks or more after the incident that's causing it. So, for example, if you were in a car crash and the next day you were watching a car commercial and it brought back the sensation of the accident, that's not PTSD. If it's 4 weeks later and you still can't watch a car commercial, that's PTSD. Okay. So soldiers, accident or disaster victims, sexual assault victims, etc., are all at a higher risk for experiencing PTSD. So the greater the emotional distress during the trauma, the greater the risk for PTSD. Some psychologists think it is often overdiagnosed. They think that the term trauma is a little bit too vague. So they cite survivor resiliency. So, like, most people who experience trauma don't develop a long-term PTSD. They cite refugees and Holocaust survivors who did not develop post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic growth, they say, they also use as facing the struggle and overcoming it tends to make people have better relationships, increased personal strength, and better priorities, etc. So they kind of comment that not everybody develops PTSD. They're not questioning its validity. They're questioning how often people are diagnosed with it. Okay, so let's look at explaining personality disorders. So we're going to look at it from different perspectives in psych. Learning perspective, observational learning, and biological. Okay, so from the learning perspective, there is a link between generalized anxiety and the classical conditioning of fear. Okay, so they think that that the stimulus can be generalized in reinforcement. So you're almost seeing classical conditioning. The behavior is encouraged, and therefore the fear gets worse. So again, they say that PTSD, they point out, tends to get worse when they're reminded of the trauma. So they're thinking that trauma can be your conditioned stimulus, and the response is a reaction. And they also point out that some phobias could come from, experience. Fear of falling could come from actually having fallen, and it hurt a lot. Okay. So observational learning, they think they learn fears from observing other fears. If they have a parent, let's say a kid develops a phobia of a dog, and that could come from the fact that every time they were around a dog as a child, their parent would scoop them up and go, no, 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 not the dog, and kind of encourage an anxious response to being in that animal's presence, and the kid learned it and then developed the phobia that way. Okay. And then you have the biological perspective. So Most fears tend to come from situations that could actually be dangerous, like flying or heights or poisonous spiders or things like that. And they argue that from an evolutionary perspective, we're encouraged to have these fears so that we don't do something stupid and die. And our genes could, they're noticing that anxiety and OCD to a certain extent are hereditary. So they do think that some people are genetically predisposed to have phobias or anxiety. People with OCD have increased brain activity in areas associated with their behavior. And the anterior cingulated cortex are areas that monitor actions and check for errors, and that's kind of highly activated in someone with OCD. Okay. So PTSD could come from somebody who is already genetically high strung, and then they experience something traumatic, and those two factors together create issues. And we've noticed that in identical twins, they've done studies that there's a higher likelihood in identical twins of having the same phobia, which makes sense because they have the same DNA in an identical twin. Okay, so in the chapter 9 section, unit 9 section of, I can't talk today, of this class, there are videos for Crash Course. I want you to watch the one on anxiety disorders and OCD. All right, be safe, guys. Miss you.